Hey folks, welcome to Strong Towns Ask Strong Towns Anything. It used to be called office hours. That's almost what I was going to say, but the whole idea is we're gathering together to be able to take up various questions that we're dealing with in our communities. And today we've got a special session related to the Strong Towns Budget Decoder. And so I would definitely encourage you to go to strongtowns.org/decoder and check it out for yourself. This is part of that deep look at what our communities are actually grappling with. And what's surprising about the work that Linda and Mitch and Chuck put in, as well as others that have tested it, is that it's actually something you can do with a limited amount of time and a limited education in these things. You don't need to be a whiz, although it certainly helps. But if you're not, if you're more like me, you also can definitely make sense of your community's budgets and begin to understand the longer term financial impacts and trace what is happening within our communities. Joining us today is Michel Durand-Wood. He is my brother-in-law, but that's not what makes him special. What is more important is that he is a great writer and thinker on these things. Go check out his blog, dearwinnipeg.com or .ca, sorry, dearwinnipeg.ca.
.com.
.com. Okay, I got it right at the first time. All right. And also a forthcoming author of the book, You'll Pay for This, which is available for pre-order. I didn't tell him that I was going to be hawking his book, but it is definitely worth it, if only for the opportunity to be able to dive into these things more effectively. I use these slides in presentations that Mitch had created on his blog of what traditional development in Winnipeg look like. And you can see that building out of capacity compared to the brand new shiny transit-oriented development at the Seasons of Tuxedo. And there's so many more examples like this that I use frequently in the presentations that I give that Mitch has put together, but also try to share with more people just to demonstrate what happens when we begin to lose sight of what it takes to build lasting prosperity. And once we've gone ahead and done that, how do we actually account for the financial situation that we find ourselves in? And so our first question is, would it be theoretically optimal? Oh man, this is going to get nerdy, but you guys are all here for it. And definitely drop comments in the questions as well. I'm going to drop these in the chat just so that way if I stumble over the words. But the question is talking about the net financial position of the community, which is one of our key sort of indicators. And Mitch, maybe you can explain the net financial position, why that is relevant. But can it be zero? And is that all right? Or is it supposed to be in a surplus?
Yeah, I can answer that. So short answer, no. Long answer, here we go. So to understand what the net financial position is, it is basically where we're taking the cash we have on hand and we're subtracting all of the liabilities, so all the debt, all the financial obligations that we have on the books, and we subtract that to see how much money we have left over. So if we have a negative number, that means we don't have enough money to pay all of our debts. And so we are relying on creating that new money in the future in operating budgets. If we have a surplus in this number, if we have a positive number, that means we have enough money to pay all of our debts as they come due and a little bit of extra, right? So that's that extra that we want to use for unforeseen circumstances, stuff that might happen in the future that we can't predict, that we want to have money on hand. But it also is there for foreseen circumstances. That's the stuff we're going to use. If we don't want to have to use debt the next time we replace our infrastructure, we need to have that money on hand, and that's that money, right? And so it could be at zero, but if it's at zero when it comes time to replace some infrastructure, we'll need to borrow money at that point. So if we want to avoid doing that, we've got to have that money set aside. Compound that with the fact that inflation exists. That means the money we need to have set aside at a non-zero amount is a moving target and is going to continue to go up over time, right? And so basically what we want to see is some sort of a increasing line, because that money will be worth less and less over time. You're always moving that target, you're always adding a little bit more. So that's the long answer.
Maybe I'll get Aaron to elaborate more on what you said there, Aaron, about the idea of there being a suitable ratio in that, like the general
Yeah.
amount.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So that's what the financial assets to liabilities ratio. So instead of an absolute number, you're getting a relative number. And so for that one, you could have a flat line, and that would be okay. What's the minimum goal for that number to be flatlining at? That depends on your community's appetite for risk, right? If you are very risk averse, you're going to want a higher number, so you got more money set aside. If you're very, as a community, really okay with risk, then maybe you're fine with a lower number. So there is no perfect number that you should strive for. But yeah, basically, for that one to be a flat line, that's okay. If your number is, I mean, again, it basically tells you how quickly you're getting better or worse off, right? So as an increasing line, that means you're getting better off in a more quickly. If it's a declining line, that means your things are getting worse more quickly. If it's flat, that means things are either increasing, getting better or worse, or staying the same at a constant rate. And so, yeah, so a flat line on that one would be fine, as long as your number is positive. Um, what that positive number needs to be at is a matter for your community to decide on its own.
Yeah. As a question, do we know if utilities, for example, like a water utility or sewage utility, would they all be in a net financial position that was, or typically if they were well run, be in a net financial position that was quite positive because of their practice of holding reserves for long-term capital replacement programs? Like many of them seem to be better run if their rates are set by a commission, but they also have like built into that rate calculation what they need for the longer term. Would we expect a net financial position to be quite healthy if we just looked at those utilities?
Yeah, so anything that owns infrastructure, anything that has capital assets, you're going to want to have money set aside for its eventual replacement. So unless you're going to do it all with debt all the time, where you'll have a negative net financial position constantly, you're going to want to see that. As a city, if you own all your utilities and everything's part of your own um, on one financial statement, you can have some components that are negative and some that are positive, and then overall you want to be positive, but you have to recognize what that means is that certain aspects of your city are subsidizing other aspects, which again is up to a community to decide. There are some things in the Canadian statements. Everything is consolidated. In the American statements, you'll have what is called I think it's called a discrete component unit, a DCU. Those are reported a little bit separately. Those are because those are actually legally separate entities. So sometimes there'll be a library or an airport or sometimes a utility. They'll show up in some places in your statements. They're not part of your statements, but they're there because the benefits accrue totally to your city or solely to your city.
Mm.
And so the way the governmental standards accountings work means that they have to be reported there, but they're not technically part of your city's financials because they are discrete, separate legal
Yeah.
entities. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And can you explain, just for the layperson, like the idea of a depreciating asset,
Mhm.
and the way in which, like from an accounting perspective, it is that hunk of concrete and steel like has less and less value as it depreciates, but that may not actually reflect its, how much lifespan it has left, and sort of the balance that communities have to strike in terms of knowing what they have and what they need to replace eventually.
Yeah, I mean, a depreciating asset, the easiest way to think about it is to think about it like a car.
Mhm.
Your car is a depreciating asset. When you buy it, it's worth X, but the second you drive it off the lot, and then the more you drive it, the more you use it up, the older it gets, the less and less it's worth.
Yeah.
But that money is spent, right? You still bought the car at a certain cost, or you might still be paying for it through car payments. That money is being spent regardless of, you know, as it's getting
Yeah.
used. And
Yeah.
so eventually though, that your car will come to the end of its life and you'll need to replace it. So you'll have to have money again to replace it. And so that's kind of the same thing with infrastructure, is that we buy a bridge, well then is the instant we paid for it or the instant we built it, it starts getting used up, starts getting older. Eventually we need to replace it in the
Mm.
same kind of way. I forget the second part of your question.
No, that was helpful because
Yeah.
I mean, there's the whole asset management side of it, which is,
Mhm.
that vehicle did not fundamentally change the moment it left the lot. It's not like all of a sudden
Mhm.
the crankshaft doesn't work, but
Mhm.
it's sort of like going broke, like you go broke
Yeah.
slowly and then all of a sudden. And
Well, and
that's the
it's
same
like
thing. with
Yeah,
failure of
like
that
so
critical
so for
infrastructure.
instance, you got to change the oil every,
Yeah.
3,000 miles. You got to change the tires every, 60,000 miles or whatever it is. Well, that means, if your tires are costing you, whatever, $1,000 to replace, that means, every mile you're spending 0.6 cents, right? That your tires
Yeah.
are getting used up.
Yeah.
And so that's the same kind of, you're not spending that 0.6 cents in that moment, but that's what's happening on the books. We're accounting for that with depreciation. We're saying, okay, we used up 0.6 cents here. And if we don't put that money aside, we're going to have a surprise,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
at 60,000
Yeah.
miles where it's like, oh, I haven't been putting aside 0.6 cents every mile. I have to come up with $1,000, right? So
Yeah.
that's basically the idea here. Um, to
And the accounting is pretty neutral as to whether you are a good maintenance city or a bad maintenance city. Like Jay asked the question, can the depreciation be slowed with proper maintenance, and how does that factor in? I think the actual, like, dismantling of core infrastructure can be slowed, or its gradual decline. But my perception is that that's not actually reflected in sort of like the schedule of depreciation. Wouldn't be
yeah.
like, hey, we're a top-notch maintenance community, so we get to like buff our numbers compared to other places that have not been doing the oil changes and are just expecting stuff to fail.
Well, and that's exactly right. Like same as a car. Like if you the better you maintain it, if you stick to the oil change schedule, your car's going to last longer
Yeah.
than if you don't. And same thing, they say a well-maintained road can last, 75 to 80 years. And a non-maintained road was going to last you maybe 15, right? And so you can spread that out with good maintenance. A lot of that sometimes, some maintenance is capital in nature, some of it is operating in nature. But the accounting is not necessarily going to differentiate. Um, the accounting is an overall approximation, so you're going to get a good average of where you are. But because it's called straight line depreciation. So basically, what they have set numbers. They say, okay, a sewage pipe is going to last 100 years, and a bridge is going to last 70 years, and so they have these numbers. Basically, what they do is they take the purchase price, and if it's a pipe and it's 100 years, what they do is every year they take 1/100th of the value away, right?
Yeah.
So for 100 years. So at the end of year 100, it'll be worth zero. So it's just a straight line. Um,
Yeah.
Actual infrastructure doesn't actually depreciate in a straight line like that. For instance, a road, it's going to depreciate hardly anything in the first 10 years. It's going to be
Mhm.
good as new. But then in the next 5 years, then it's just going to crash to be worth almost nothing over the next 5 or 10 years. And then it'll just be worth almost nothing for the rest of its
Yeah.
life, right? So on average, yeah, maybe that's 25 years, but it's more of an S curve in reality, whereas the accounting accounts for it in a straight line. But overall, with all your infrastructure, with everything, like it's a close approximation
Mhm.
of where you are.
Mhm. No, that's helpful. I'm going to bring Linda up. Linda, about Kyle's question here, just, I know you did cover it in the live stream, but just to clarify again, is it best to use the original numbers or the corrected numbers if we ever notice that, say, the 2024 report contains better numbers for 2023? And how frequently are we seeing that? And do you have any suggestions on how to like help people not to fret that maybe they've missed the numbers that, at one point were released and nobody noticed?
Yeah, my take is to work with the best numbers you have, which are always the most recent. So I kind of learned through the process to work backwards, to start with the most recent year available and fill in that year and the prior year from that report so that any prior year adjustments are reflected. That said, I also found that I don't think there were any cases where prior period adjustments would have materially impacted the analysis that we're doing. I mean, we're reporting ratios and trends over time, and those prior period adjustments really didn't rise to the level of material
Right.
changes to what the chart looked like. It might not
Little,
even
yeah.
be,
Mhm.
nothing like that.
Yeah.
So, don't worry if you've missed a prior period adjustment somewhere. But if it's easy and you're comfortable doing it, the approach I recommend is to work backwards so that you're
Mhm.
sure to capture any prior
Yeah.
period adjustments.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we had people going into city halls and taking photos of old documents just to make sure that they get a longer time span, and there's a ton of value in that. But that's where your strategy of saying like work backwards will also help you to see those moments where, yeah, something was, and it's not misrepresented so much as just updated with the correct numbers. Unless if you see massive swings, you might want to call in the auditors, because then
Yeah,
they're doing
that's
some funny
something
stuff.
different entirely.
Yeah. And that
Generally,
happens too, Mitch.
generally the auditors will have taken a look at it because these are in the
Right.
next year's financials.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
But yeah, like Linda said, they're just restating something that new information came to light after the year end, and it'll generally be just a small amount, a small change. It won't impact the major trends that we're highlighting here. Yeah.
I posted the next question from Brent in the chat. What is ACFR? Just that's revenues, right? ACFR?
Annual comprehensive financial report. This is the
Report. Okay.
annual.
Oh, that's the big daddy.
Yeah.
Okay. If it breaks out the activity totals, do you add all three columns together when entering into the decoder?
Yeah, generally you would. Most of the time they'll have a totals column for you, but if they don't, then yeah, you want to add those up unless those are, like we said, the DCUs, the component units, discrete component units. You don't want to add those in. You leave those out. Those are legally separate entities, but those will be listed under, component units. And so anything that's under component units, you leave out, but anything that would be under government activity, if they've separated it out to schools and whatever else, then yeah, you would add those up. Your utilities will be under your business activities generally. Add all those up as well. If you've got more than one business activity separated out, if you don't have a totals column, yes, add it all up.
So as an example, in the city of Surrey, they are the sole shareholders of the Surrey City Center Development Corporation. In that case, they would have their own books, and the only thing coming to the city would be revenues in and probably some version of insurance out. Like, is that included, or is that an example of a discrete business unit that you would exclude?
So that's it's a little bit different in Canada. So in Canada, you won't have to worry about adding or subtracting anything. The consolidated statements as they should appear that work's already done for you.
Okay.
In Canada, so you don't have to worry about that in Canada. It's just in the US that you would have to worry about that.
Yeah. All right, let's grab another question here from Bill. So I know we are deep in the weeds of this, and I love it. I'm here for it. But if some years don't have all the required numbers, should we still enter the rest of the data for those years, or does that create misleading trends in the charts? And maybe one third question is it possible to sort of put in placeholder numbers based on sort of trend lines of, if it was this much last year and this much like 2 years ago, we can assume some version and then just note that in your reporting. That's 3 questions, I guess. But if some years don't have numbers, what do you do?
Well, I was going to specifically address the example in the question, which was the deferred inflows and outflows. And those line items are kind of unique in that prior to, I want to say that GASB issued guidelines calling for the breakout of those line items in the 2011-2012 timeframe. And again, this only affects the US. So it's not that those numbers or the items represented in those numbers weren't included prior to that time frame. It's that they were reflected and included in different lines, either assets or liabilities. So those lines will be blank for US spreadsheets prior to around somewhere between 2011 and 2014. Not every municipality started reflecting the new reporting at the same time. So you will have empty spaces in the worksheet for years prior to whenever your city started following the guidelines and separately reporting that information. But know that in the total assets, the total liabilities, and the net financial position calculations, the items that are now being broken out separately were included in other lines that you've already picked up. So it's not going to skew the charts in any way. It's just we provided those separate lines in the worksheet because they started being reported separately, and we needed a way to pick them up. So there's that. I don't know what other lines would be missing.
It's supposed to be
I didn't,
comprehensive, so it should show.
right. I didn't run into any cases where that happened. The only other area where it can get a little confusing, especially in the US, is in looking at the total cost of assets and making sure that you're picking up all the pieces that need to go into that information. In the US in particular, the business activities assets can be broken out separately, and you have to add a couple of pieces together to get at the total. So
Talking about missing information, and Troy just rolled in, and your timing is impeccable, Troy, because we're about to take up your question on the city having debt. And then I'm noting Aaron and Nathan have some awesome questions here that we'll come to in a moment. If a city has some debt, so you know that they've taken out debt, but there's nothing showing under debt service or interest, is that going to appear elsewhere? Do we have any knowledge of where that information should be pulled from?
Yeah, that means it's somewhere.
Yeah.
It's somewhere, and yeah, the one report that we tend to pull it from is, it's normal for it to be there, but there is some flexibility into how things are reported. Like, for instance, in Canada, like the interest operating statement, it is broken down in a different way. It doesn't show interest or what the expenses are. It just breaks it down generally by department, which is not helpful for us. And so we have to go pull the interest number out of a different section. So that might happen again in certain cities where they've just reported under a slightly different format that they're allowed to. So that interest, if you have debt, there has to be interest somewhere. So there will be a section somewhere that will list out the interest paid.
Yeah. And even just doing a control F, like search for the word interest and
Yeah.
see like where it does appear. And that's useful. And I think, how do we know, maybe a broader question, is it just from a general awareness of like your city's municipal finances that you would know if they had debt? Like in my city, I know that we took out like debt in order to build a community center, and like residents in that area were all committed to like paying an extra surcharge on their taxes. So I know that we have that debt. And the only question is like, where do I find that info? Is there any way else to know when your city does have debt? Is it always in a predictable spot where you can find that?
Well, it'll be on that very first report where the statement of position, which tells you about your liabilities.
Okay.
We pick out that liabilities number. That's going to be listed there if you have debt. Otherwise, your only liabilities might be accounts payable or something like that. But if you have long-term debt, it'll be there, and it'll be obvious because it'll be a relatively large number. Because you don't go out and take out a bond for a very small amount generally. So yeah.
All right. I have a question from Riley here. And Riley, if you have already in Google Docs created the worksheet, that might be useful just to drop that in there. But he said, I'm a little spooked because my net financial position increased from 50 million to 150 million, up from 25 just 15 years ago. Either you have the world's best mayor, or he's saying like, is this actually something that we should see? There's so much wild positive growth. I want to make sure to understand it better and get a I appreciate the readiness to get a double check before you share it more broadly. And maybe this is, I'll add a little editorial comment. I've been surprised at how much that moves. And so maybe that is realistic in its own way. But yeah, just a quick question over to you, Mitch, what you would advise.
So yeah, once you've double checked that you didn't put in a typo, once you've double checked that you have the rounding right, that that you're not putting stuff in thousands that was reported in millions the year before, that you make sure you're putting in steady numbers. Once you know those numbers are right, there's a bunch of reasons why it can go up significantly. So yeah, the idea here is like, these aren't like targets. These are sort of indicators to get us to ask more questions, right? And so the fact that you have looked at it and are asking yourself a question, that's what this is meant to do. So everything, all of these are connected together in some way. So one of the first two places I would look is if your city seems to be stockpiling money like this, which in general would be a good thing. You gotta know why that is, right? So maybe you can go look at your government transfers ratios and see if you've been getting a lot of state and federal grants over a couple of years that you've been putting aside. So it might be just that. It might be that you've been receiving more state and federal money. The other thing too is if you want to look at your infrastructure ratio or your net book to cost ratio, if that one is going down, that basically means that you're putting money aside, but you're doing it at the expense of not maintaining your infrastructure, right? That'll show up that way as well. So if your infrastructure line's heading down, but your net financial position's heading up, it's just one at the expense of the other. So those would be the first two places I would look. If it's not there, then you got more digging to do to find out, like, to ask questions of your public service, of your council, to be, hey, why is this, like, how did we manage this, and are we ignoring something else? And they should have an answer for that.
Yeah. Certainly the ARPA money coming in would have helped in that, where all of a sudden that can really like be a surge, or maybe move some other things off the books, or not off the books, but
yeah. And in that case, that tells you that it's a one-time thing. It's not a long-term trend, right? It's something that, ARPA money is coming in once, and that's that, right? So make good use of it, and know that you can't rely on that as a long-term trend.
Yeah.
Which is why you should be looking at this as a, get as many data and many years of data as you can, right? So that you can see through these shorter term, like 4 or 5 years, that might be a blip, right?
And it does seem that there are these years where all of a sudden cities will either pick up or like really like fall off the cliff. And would that tend to overlap with like key projects that they've committed to, or when like a highway or like an overpass expansion like comes online? I'm always curious sort of what accounts for those spikes. It's probably on a place by place basis, but
It'll be a place by place basis. You'll find more of these like wild spikes in smaller places because the numbers are smaller. So the changes are more drastic. But even in larger places, you could have these big changes, again, based on, extraordinary help through pandemic from the federal government, or it could be sometimes that, you just did a massive project upgrade and it all went on the books in the same year. That would be a big change. Maybe you sold an asset. For instance, like in Winnipeg in 2004, we sold our electric utility. So that made, we had a negative net financial position. Then all of a sudden in 1 year, it shot up to a positive one, is because we sold an asset. You can only do that once. And as we've seen, is then that the trend then resumed back to downwards, back to negative, right? So you can, that's the idea, is these are meant to sort of inform what kind of questions you should be asking, right? Because when you get financial statements that are 100 or 500 or 800 pages long, where do you even start? This is a good place to get us asking the questions that get us to the right answers more quickly.
Yeah. Maybe Riley, I won't be able to dive in and do any of the sort of double checking your numbers, but I think that posting it there, I saw the link there. That's awesome. And just an encouragement, once people are completed their worksheets, to submit them at strongtowns.org/decoder, just submitting the link to a shared view for others. What we're doing is we're taking more and more and more of those, and it'll present an opportunity, hopefully, to do some deeper, sort of bigger displays of what we're seeing. But I do want to pick, and that's for Arlette's question as well, that we do intend to have comparable data from cities completing this to be shared out. But I'm going to pull up Nathan's question because it's an important one, very technical. Some cities report bank charges and short-term interest, and a separate category of interest on long-term debt. Older reports only include interest on long-term debt. Is it better to be consistent over time and only include interest on long-term debt, or should the short-term interest, including bank charges, be sort of part of that line?
Yeah, I would say you want to stay consistent. In general, the short-term and bank charges should be a relatively small amount as part of your total revenue. So whether it's included or not shouldn't really change much of the trend. It's really the long-term interest that's gonna create that trend. That said, stay consistent as much as you can. So if you're excluding it, keep it excluded. If you're including it, keep it included. That's fine. But pick one and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we got to keep the Canadian banks solvent somehow. So charging fees to cities is gonna, yeah, that'll be a part of it. Awesome. I'm seeing a bunch of new stuff coming in. So let's and there's a good reminder there. Robert Lee has included you. There's people in your finance department in your communities that are often willing to, if you come in a non-adversarial way and just ask to have the conversation or say, you know, can we just like I'm fascinated by this and I want to support what we're doing as a community, but also help us to, you know, be able to talk about it. Half the time they'll say, whoa, I've never had anybody ask me in a polite way or a meaningful way. How do we have more conversations about this? There are sort of the, you know, and I think earlier there was a comment about like some of the government accountability sort of hawkishness can get really like messed up in a lot of different ways, to the point where in Medicine Hat, for example, I was just reading the news where there's someone that's appointed themselves as the government hawk, and the consequences they now have to communicate with the city through a lawyer, because it's become so adversarial, and that is contrary to the strong town spirit of like ask genuine questions, genuinely listen. Don't, you know, there are no cartoon villains that are running around like wrecking your place. That in many of the cases, we have just been unwittingly trapped in a system that doesn't build long-term prosperity. And we're grappling with the consequences of that and needing to fix that up. But we've got a question from Melbourne. Certain services are provided by the state government, and should that be reflected? I mean, I think for the purposes here, the Finance Decoder, you work with just what your municipal documents state. But is there any accounting for how some of those main roads, certain utilities, that sort of stuff is not captured there? Maybe in a city that has a lot of state roads in the US or in Canada, that would be a similar thing where they are not on the hook for certain types of responsibilities that other cities would be. How do we account for that?
If the city's not responsible for them, they shouldn't appear in the books. And so
Yeah.
they're accounted, it's accounted for already. Yeah.
But then there's also not the revenue coming in. Like you don't collect taxes for something you don't have to provide. So there is this balancing out, Thomas, to your point, that there would be. I mean, we've had a few people, Linda, I think, request like, can we do something similar at the state level? That would be a lot more complex and probably beyond the scope of what Strong Towns is interested in. But it raises an interesting question that like we also don't see these trend lines for our provincial governments or state governments, and it would be useful if we could.
Yeah, actually, these can be used at the state level. Absolutely. They were like in Canada, they're developed for all orders of government. And I've seen provinces like province of Nova Scotia, for instance, I've seen them use them. Again, these are top level trends, right? These are balance sheet ratios. These are the same ratios that investors use for corporations. They're just called different things because there's different terminology in municipal accounting, but the financial ratios that they provide, the information that they provide, is basically the same. Yeah.
Linda, do we have the decoder as an Excel sheet as well?
We don't specifically have it created, and
You can
you are
actually,
able to
yeah.
download it as an Excel file from Google Sheets, but you want to be careful doing that because I haven't fully tested it out, but I think it might mess up the charts a little bit. That's something that we can take to work on to create an Excel only version, but we haven't had the bandwidth to do that just yet.
But certainly it would seem that the first sheet, the input sheet, would work well. And then
Yeah, the input
Yeah.
sheet is fine. It's the charts that the results tab that gets a little wonky when it's converted to Excel.
Yeah. So Robert, just sharing what Linda was saying there, that like the input table, if you go and download this as a Microsoft Excel, it'll work to be able to do that. But the results would be the area where some of the changes would potentially start to break a little bit. But
Yep.
yeah, fascinating to see the shifts in Iowa City. So yeah, thanks for sharing that as well. Riley, I appreciate the comment about living in an actively capricious or retaliatory social environment. Thanksgiving dinners must be fun then. But let's dive into our next question. How are bond funded activities accounted for in the decoder? So if a city like Miami takes out a bond and its financial trend drops off dramatically, how is that incorporated? That's from Alex Adams, who's a local conversation leader down in Miami.
Yeah, this it doesn't differentiate as you know, and it shouldn't. If you take out a bond, it's a liability and it goes on the books, and that's incorporated in here. And so yeah, that's kind of the genius thing about this is that it's top level and it incorporates, you know, any borrowing your city does, it's in there. Any cash your city brings in, it's in there. And so it really takes this bird's eye view of the major trends. So it doesn't matter if you took out a bond for operations, or if you took out a bond for capital improvements. From a financial perspective, those are the same. You still need to pay them, right? It doesn't matter if you have $1,000 and you spend it on Taylor Swift tickets, and then you know put your $1,000 roof repair on your credit card. It's the same thing as if you put the tickets on your credit card and spent the cash on the roof. From a financial perspective, you're in the same place. You have no cash and $1,000 of debt. And the same thing for a city. So that's taken into account as soon as the city reports the bond on in its financial statements. It's in here. Yeah, through the liabilities number. Yeah.
I've got a question. So Tim posted a question. I'm not 100% certain about the numbers around the special option sales tax that's being used for capital expenditures, and he's not been able to find interest expenses in his community. Tim, maybe you might have to upload the links to the documents that you're working with. This might be a little bit beyond what we can manage just in the next 20 minutes here, but any thoughts or suggestions for Tim? Again, I think that he's not alone in saying, like, I want to be able to at least like check this before I go, and you know, check yourself before you wreck yourself is the idea. So any thoughts for Tim?
Yeah, I mean, so it sounds like your city took out some bonds and then they have a sales tax to pay the interest on those bonds. And so, yeah, there's going to be stuff like that sometimes that isn't super transparently reported in financials. The information is there unless they've created some off-balance sheet entity, some discrete component unit that is taking care of it. And so that might show up in there. So it won't be in your numbers, which is, I don't want to say shady, but I mean it's legal, but it really does blur the message a little bit. So I can't, without seeing it, it's hard to know exactly. But yeah, if there's a bond, the interest should be there. Again, unless they created some independent, separate legal entity to take that on in the city's name. But then
and then you would still see transfers, or like either transfers of revenue in, or unless it was a completely neutral, like.
Yeah, like if the separate entity is collecting the sales tax revenue and also paying the bonds, you know, that wouldn't necessarily show up on the city's books. But then, yeah, where is the infrastructure? Is it on that corporation's books, or is it on the city's books or the county's books? Yeah, you're getting into like pretty detailed stuff. So it's hard to answer in a general way for this, but so we have to look at it to know for sure. But yeah.
We've got a fascinating question here from Dawn in Colorado, where, as I understand it, they have the metropolitan districts that are set up by the developers that sort of are much like an HOA, as in like they have, or a strata in BC. We have strata councils where the strata continues to, like, at the block level or here at the neighborhood level, impose an additional rate of taxation in order to cover the costs there. And we wrote an article on the Strongtown site about the fact that many of these metropolitan districts are not actually like solvent. And so they're deeply insolvent, and the residents in them didn't realize that they were signing up not only to pay municipal taxes, but then within a subset of their neighborhood, they're on the hook for a lot of these things. Any thoughts on how to capture that sort of dynamic? I suppose you could run it just on the Metropolitan District itself and do a run the numbers on those things. Any thoughts on how to look at the fiscal health given the many metro districts, or, you know, because the strata is purely private, or a condo association in the States. But this is like public-private, sort of like neighborhood based. Any insights into that?
I mean, you can run it absolutely on the
Mhm.
Metropolitan District. You can run it on a condo corporation. You can. The terminology
Yeah.
will be different, so you'll need to know what numbers you're looking for. But these are just balance sheet ratios, right? So these will be applicable for anything. So if you see that your city is doing really well, but your Metropolitan District is deep underwater, you know what is in the middle of that is you, right? And
Yeah,
so
the one
yeah,
wallet.
so that is concerning, right? So
Yeah.
that's something where you can start asking questions about that for sure. But yeah, absolutely, you can start can apply it to almost any financial entity at all. Yeah.
What about the wrinkle that Aaron is facing in Arkansas, that there are municipalities that do not do the ACFR, but instead prepare them in just a version of a financial report? Is that a dead end? Is there sort of a coping strategy? Any advice for Aaron?
No, I'd say as long as they're mostly following government accounting standards on their financial report, you should still be able to pull the right numbers off. If they're not following that, then yeah, this will be pretty difficult to pull out. But would be sort of a reason to maybe push them towards using using standard accounting reports, and the ACFRs in particular. It's understandable that is more difficult in smaller municipalities that don't have as many resources. But I think it's still important when you're dealing with public funds to be accountable to the public, and there's that starts with using accepted reporting standards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aaron, maybe you want to clarify too, because there's an interesting phrase there. We prepare them on a regulatory basis is allowed. Like, that's a very, I'm assuming those aren't your words, they are their words, in which case, like, there's some sort of curiosity, like, that sounds like legal speak, like, hey, it's all fine, it's all fine. And I'm not impugning, anyone's will, but there's also, it seems like that's a dodge.
Yeah, so just to give you some context, I'm working with a couple Strong Towns members in the region, and we're doing like a whole regional analysis because we didn't want to, do like it seemed like a gotcha to one single city. So we're getting all the major. We're in a metro where there's no like one single city; it's a bunch of cities kind of clustered together. And so we were able to pull everybody else's pretty much, some years. So long story short, we get to one of the bigger cities, and I'll just say it up front. It's Rogers, Arkansas, one of the largest cities in the metro area, one of the fastest growing in the metro area, one of the most wealthy in the metro area by at least the residents' wealth. A lot of Walmart executives. It's a nice suburb of Bentonville. And so we went to them, and I started downloading. I'm like, these make no sense. Emailed them being like, hey, can you actually just send me the ACFR? The Arkansas State Audit website's giving me something else. I'm like, oh no, we don't do that. And can I share my screen? Because I actually can bring up, yeah.
I'm expecting parchment.
I'm expecting
Although it's all there,
a
it's
shoebox
digital.
of receipts.
Yeah.
What's crazy to me is that Rogers is actually one of the most forward thinking. Like, they were the first one to pull off parking mandates. Like, I've met the mayor before, very forward thinking city. So this actually kind of shocked me and scared me when I saw this. But like, you see it right on this is like what you download from the state. And it says basis of which I don't know if that's just like legal speak, but basis of adverse opinion.
Yeah.
Ain't great to see. So I don't know if it's just like hate to kind of rag on Arkansas, but it's the way we've always done it. kind of mentality, or if they're
Yeah.
trying to do something different. Like I don't know what I'm looking at.
So, yeah. So basically, I mean, this is the case everywhere or almost everywhere, but in general, cities or counties or municipalities exist as in Canada, we say as a creature of the province, but in the States, we as a creature of the state. They exist because the states say they exist. And so the states set the rules for how they exist, right? And so that includes financial reporting minimums, right? And so the state has set like these are the minimums what you need to report on, which may be different than generally accepted accounting principles. And so what the city is saying here is that, yeah, we're not using generally accepted accounting principles, but the state says that's okay. This, you know, because we're still following the state minimums. So yeah, basically they're just reporting that they're within the letter of the law, even the intent of the law, that this is not illegal for them to report like this. It you know, what's legal and what is useful to the public are sometimes two different things. I know in Canada, in Manitoba, where I'm from, the province sets what the budget reporting standards are, and they are completely different than the year-end financial statements requirements, which are set by the Public Sector Accounting Board. And so we have really good year-end statements, but they're super hard to compare to the beginning of year budgets because they don't follow the same format. And that's a problem sort of throughout Canada. And so, but you know, the city is still following the rules. So yeah, so you can't, it's hard to fault them for it because they just are doing what they've been told to do by the state. That doesn't mean they can't do more than that, and provide also an ACFR like a lot of other cities are doing, and that's super helpful. So
Everybody else in the region
yeah.
is doing.
Yeah,
That's what's
exactly.
bizarre to me is like you have one of like the wealthiest cities with the well-funded city staffs in the region, and they're putting together I think it's 55-page document compared to like what's typical around here, which is like 180 some page document. That's all the same. Every other city is the same. Like I can go to page 55 and I know that's where the capital assets and depreciation numbers are going to be.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's hard to know without going through the whole document whether the information is even there, that all the information that you need. But even if some of it is available, then you can still fill it in and get some of the graphs going and get some ideas. But yeah, I think this would be a good opportunity to like, you know, come in friendly and, you know, kind of use other city peer pressure to be like, hey, look what they're doing. Maybe we should do the same thing. Just as a, you know, increase transparency and an increase you know, usefulness for the public, for council, for local media who are reporting on this. So yeah, it's again, these are meant to ask questions, and this has generated a question for you. Why aren't we doing this to begin with? So that like this is it's a positive, I think, that you can bring this to your city and be like, hey, let's do this. So,
and my mind goes to the burn rate of the auditing companies every year writing up these reports saying like, by the way, your stuff does not accord with, you know, general practices. And so we, you know, release these opinions, but we have to like add asterisks to all of them, or like, you know, just the way that it describes, you know, these effects of this change are presumed to be material and pervasive. You know, these financial statements do not present fairly in accordance with accounting principles, the financial position of each fund of the city. All of those provisos, like you do away with by following the standard. And I mean, at Strong Towns, we don't blindly say just follow the standard, but we do say, you know, in this instance, these people are not like, they're not helping themselves.
Yeah, and it's not that the numbers are wrong, is that you can't know that they're wrong in a, you know, a certain way, or you can't know, they're not presented in a way that helps you glean the information that you need to know how well a city is doing financially, right? That's why the accounting standards were developed. Linda was going to say something. Go ahead.
Well, no, I've just been poking around the Rogers website trying to see if there's anything available, and I can't even find audited financials or financial reports. Or I'm wondering, Aaron, if you
go to Arkansas Audit, I think it's Arkansas or arcaudit.gov, one of the two. I can find the link somewhere.
Okay.
But the state requires these to be reported. Now, mind
Okay.
you, I don't think they do a good job of policing it, because like Springdale, Arkansas, instead of getting it by the 6th month of the year, they get it by the 6th month every 2 years. So I only have up to 2022 for them. But they do have to upload the ACFRs. And that's where I've been able to pull everybody's all the way back to 2009, and we're building a set of analyses. And that's where I found this Rogers one. And that's what led me to email them being like, hey, it's not the same thing. Do you guys keep it somewhere else? And they were like, nope. But the question I had is, they did seem really helpful. Like all the staff around, city staffs
Yeah.
around here are.
Mhm.
If it's not in the report, is there like, would these be on the books somewhere else? Like the numbers I'm looking for, like back in their own internal records, most likely. And two, like if I just kind of write out what's in the spreadsheets, would the average, finance director for a city know what I'm talking about? Because I think there's a possibility they may pull those numbers for me if they're available.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. I think if they're being helpful and the relationship is good, you want to keep it that way. But yeah, bring your spreadsheet to them and be like, hey, I'm trying to fill this out. Do you have the information that we can fill this out together? Because ideally, we want our cities to be doing this for us, right? We want them to provide this upfront. In the Strong Towns fashion, we take the next small step, and if the cities aren't doing it, we'll do it ourselves, kind of idea. So that's where we're at. But ideally, we do want our cities to be providing this proactively and using this as part of the decision-making process and the communications process, so that everybody in the city, whether they're residents or counselors or local media, that we all are, understanding things from the same playbook, right? So yeah, I think that's a really good approach, is sit down with them and be like, look, this is the information I'm looking for. Do you have this? And let's find it together. I think that's a great approach.
And
Awesome. Thank you.
yeah, that's great. Great examples though, Aaron. Really appreciate that work. And I love what you're doing with other people to help them in their communities as well. And maybe this touches on one of the ways that Donna Boulin, who's a council member in Springfield, had shared just the challenges presented by this. And Mitch, I think maybe I'll have you comment on this too, that like bringing these types of questions up is not comfortable when it comes either with no context or a narrative of, people are just bad. And it's like, and with your Dear Winnipeg blog, like you've poked gentle fun at some of the like excesses, and yet some people have, I think reacted quite strongly, or like, oh, there's that Dear Winnipeg guy like asking these questions. But over time, it creates this recognition, like we're just wanting what's best for our community. Like you said, you're writing love letters to your community, and sometimes there's a little bit of that tough love like in it. And I think this is Donna's concern, was that council members are sort of ambushed, or felt not ambushed, but not totally given an opportunity to think ahead. Hey, we have bad numbers. What do we make of this? Or the numbers are not as healthy as they might be. Do you have any suggestions on how local folks just trying to sit down with people in the city can really couch that in a way that is, one, respectful, two, technical, and three, like illuminatory?
Yeah, I mean, my blog doesn't happen in a vacuum. I have relationships with counselors. I have relationships with the public service, right? I've for years now have been communicating with them in offline in a sense, and presenting at council, but also having meetings with them, right? And so it helps a lot when you have a face-to-face with people, where you are building a relationship over time. Your intentions can be a lot clearer that way, right? And sometimes when you're reaching out to somebody for the first time, they're gonna be on guard, right? The first time I reached out to the finance staff at my city, they had to have a communication staff in the meeting with us, because they were very worried that I was trying to, I don't know what they were worried about, but they wanted like a third-party witness or something in the room with us, who actually had no idea what we were talking about, because it was all finance gobbledygook. But over time, you get to trust each other, you get to know each other, you get to know that your intentions aren't malicious, right? And that's what you want to know. You're just trying to make sure that your city is doing well, and you're doing your job as a responsible citizen to do your part. and know that they're trying too, right? They're whether the public service or council, like they're doing the best that they can in their position. And so they may have information you don't have, you may have information they don't have. You can work together that way. But yeah, it is really about like the strong towns, like don't be a jerk. It's that, like just be normal, be nice, yeah, it's not universal, obviously. There's some people that are more difficult to get along with, obviously. But if everybody's more difficult to get along with, sometimes the problem is you. So, yeah, just, yeah.
Nobody gets along with me can sometimes be like, well, in that case, yeah. And
Can I make a comment about that?
yeah, Donna, that'd be great.
The problem that happened was that our local conversation person did the spreadsheet the very next morning after it was published, which is a good thing. But then he put it on social media, totally out of context. And I mean, I've been following this, for years. And my concern was, why didn't the local conversation talk about this and say, well, what is our next smallest step to take this? They did not. He just blasted it on social media. And I'm like, okay, our local media, might be reaching out to the mayor, the council members, the city staff for interviews when they are clueless as to what is this decoder, what does it mean, that type of thing. So that's where I just got upset because, like you said, it's like it's either a gotcha or being a jerk, which, that's, I don't want strong towns to get a bad name locally. That's what's
or yourself either, right? And I think there's kind of two things there. One is when we're talking about municipal finance or any kind of finance, like most people don't understand it, they don't know it, right? And so coming out with something like this, it requires an enormous amount of context, an enormous amount of education to get people to understand what they're even looking at. And then the other thing that's really important is when you're showing this and you provide that context and it shows that your city is doing poorly, as most of them are, it's really easy for the people who are currently in charge or currently doing that work to get very defensive about it, to be like, hey, whoa, it was broken when I got here. And the reality is it was. Like, that's the thing, is we have to be very clear in our messaging when we're talking to the people in our city that, like, this isn't anybody's fault, right? This has been happening since before all of us were born, right? This is a decades long problem that has been decades in the making. It's not anybody's fault. It's not the mayor's fault. It's not the finance officer's fault. But despite that, here we are. So what are we going to do about it together, right? So that I think is kind of the angle that needs to be taken, because it's the truth, right? But that's not what people will get right away when this kind of stuff is shared, right? There will be people who will feel defensive, without needing to, but you have to be aware of that. People have feelings, right? So we gotta be conscious of that. Yeah.
Feelings and finite time schedule. So I know that we're at the top of the hour. It has been awesome. I really appreciate Mitch and Linda coming on. So good to have you here, as well as the whole crew. We've got quite a group here, Donna, and I'm grateful for your time, but also for each of the participants here today. If you enjoyed this, please do, and you want to carry on, or we could potentially host another session. I'm sure Mitch's game further down the road to be able to do it again, and even reviewing stuff like we did with Aaron, actually taking a look at documents, doing that sort of work. Linda is amazing. She's already helped a couple of people just like troubleshoot their documents and see that, in some cases they had entered in things in duplicate, and helping with that. So there is some additional support. We can't commit her to doing it 24 hours a day, but we definitely want to help you to be able to do this. Just a quick encouragement, go to strongtowns.org/decoder to upload your decoder once you've had an opportunity to finish it. reminder as always, don't be a jerk with these things, but at the same time, do make that honest effort. Like Riley said, sitting down with somebody sometimes can be so valuable in contrast to just like dropping an email in their lap, especially if it comes across like, sort of a legal like expose or journalistic sort of like fact hunt. No, you're looking to like start those conversations and build on that. Love Jean's comment. I'm with you. There's half of this is over our heads. The other half is within reach. And increasingly we build up that capacity to do tough things. And so love the energy, the enthusiasm, the great chat as well. And look forward to next week, Wednesday. We'll be back at it. We'll do a general session of just general Strong Towns questions. So we can certainly take up more things like that. Invite your friends, and thanks again. Keep doing what you can to build strong towns and take care of your communities. Bye, everybody.